Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey there, you have found your way to another episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for selecting this podcast. Let's face it, there's like 2.3 million podcasts that have been started the last few years. But here's a little secret. Over 1.5 million of them have faded away. There's a thing called pod fade. But Craig and I have been here with the Digital Enterprise Society since May of 2019, and we're not going anywhere. And we appreciate you for coming along on the journey of this show that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, we're back for another week.
You know, you and I have been doing this for 2.5 years. Pretty soon you're going to have to say, and a former podcast host, but never mind. I'm just joking. It's good to hear you.
Hey, it's always good to be here with you. And we always have such good guests because every week we bring to the audience interesting interviews and other ideas to help everybody enhance and grow their careers. And today, Craig and I are joined by Melissa Drew. She is an associate partner at IBM, and she has been in procurement and supply chain for over 27 years. And what she does now is she sits at the intersection of procurement and AI technologies. Hey, Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've only been here 5 seconds and I've already learned about podcast fade.
That's right. That's right. Most podcasts that have been started tend to die out around episode 7 to 12. So we are way, way beyond that, which means we're not fading away. We're bringing this to our audience every week. So Melissa, tell us a little bit about your background. What did you do? You've been in this business that you're doing for 27 years. Give us a little bit of your history.
So I went to college at Auburn University, got a degree in management information systems, which is how do you take complex problems and break it down into smaller components and then be able to solve them and then pull it back together into big picture. What was interesting is I'm sitting in my class and the teacher says, how many of you want to be a programmer when you leave? Every single person in this class raised their hand except me. I don't want to be a programmer. I don't even like it. Sure enough, 2 years later, I'm sitting at A.T. Kearney and I'm actually doing programming and I'm building, some of the first automated, requests for proposals, within the procurement supply chain. So yeah, I started more as an accident into the data, component of it. From there, I continued to work within cognitive technologies. I started working with a company who had patented a grammar-based cognitive technology in 2004 and 2005. And then from there, I've just constantly been interweaving the procurement expertise along with the cognitive technologies and pulling them together to reimagine what digital transformation looks like.
So, Melissa, it's great to hear your voice. You and I chatted about a week ago, and one of the things that I find interesting is this whole topic of digital transformation is everywhere. I subscribe to some newspapers online, and I can't even get down through an editorial without getting a digital transformation commercial. So it seems like everybody's talking about them. Is it really real, or is it just a bunch of marketing hype? Well, I want your perspective.
Well, let me step back and define transformation just briefly. Transformation is the act of changing from one form to another with the end result being better than where you were before. Then you apply digital to that, and you've got digital transformation, which further implies you're using technologies to facilitate that transformation. So business transformation has been around, but digital transformation really started taking off around 2006, 2007, when all of those on-premise technologies started moving in the cloud. And now it was more accessible to all of the organizations. It was more affordable. You had at least 4 different companies within each space that could, focus on that competitive market price. So yeah, it sounds like it's been around for a while, but when you look at the history, it's really only been focused heavily within an organization since around the 2006, 2007 timeframe.
And that's interesting because it became affordable to the masses, right? Before then, digital transformation was done by the big companies like the one I worked at. And so, so I get why it's more popular and people have to talk about it because it's in every newspaper article you read. I just really annoys the heck out of me. I pay for a subscription and I still get an advertisement, but that's a different topic. So you have a background in procurement, along the way, supply chain. How are they using digital technologies? Here at the Digital Enterprise Society, we have a lot of the engineers that engineer products, right? But we don't talk so much about the supply chain. And I'm curious, what's enabling supply chain to be so much better with digital technologies?
Yeah, so I get asked that question sometimes, and it's really looking at why do these organizations feel like they need to change? Because it's only when an organization says, I need to change, just suddenly it moves into business and digital transformation. So when you look at how our global landscape is constantly changing, the organizations have to step back and figure out how do we improve the data? How do we become a more decision-based organization? How do we gain confidence in our data? How do we improve our global expansion, faster innovation? The changes of our consumers are changing more rapidly now. Technology is changing more rapidly now. So in order to keep up, the business itself has to change. Then once that decision's made, now comes in the digital transformation to execute that change.
Well, now, so if I think back in our lifetimes, right? When I came out of school, I had to write a report for the next gate review of a product, right? I'm an engineer by training. And that report ended up getting formatted and typed by somebody else, somebody who was really good at editing technical material, right? And lo and behold, along comes Microsoft and all the Office tools, and we start writing our own documents, and we don't write as well, but we get rid of the professional editors. And so, if you will, that first wave of digital transformation happened when we all got PCs in the 1990s or whatever it was. The kinds of transformations you're talking about now is, doing better intelligence and better decisions because you have more relevant data. Before you would get data through surveys or you had people in the field and they would collect it and tell you back to it. So I think digital transformations, I think we understand them better. It's interesting to hear how they affect the supply chain. What about the people, though? I mean, like those people that used to be the editors of technical documents, a lot of them got displaced. And I guess I want you to talk a bit about what's the importance of the people. I mean, especially those that are impacted in a negative way, whether they don't have a job anymore or they have to change their job skills.
So when I walk into an organization, one of the first things that someone at the C-suite is going to ask me is, can you come in here and recommend how to reduce my workforce? Can you come in here and level, redesign the levels of the,
And I bet you they had an MBA, but this is one of my swords that I'm going to take them out one of these days because they focus on short-term gain, which, by the way, if you're a shareholder, you might like that. But if you're a stakeholder, you may not like it because it has this broader impact that you got to think through, I think. But I'm sorry I interrupted, short-term focus is part of the problem.
I'm absolutely on the same page with you. Digital transformation or any kind of transformation is not about reducing the workforce and getting rid of people. It is about automating those repetitive tasks. It focuses on those tactical activities. And what it's supposed to do is take your workforce, all your stakeholders, and it shift them away from those tactical activities so that they can now do the more valued activities, the strategic relationships, the thinking, the analyzing, the understanding the context of the data, things that they never have application and push a button because the application doesn't do it.
Yeah, no. So we had an interesting discussion a few weeks back about reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? And the history of why were we taught those in school? And part of the history was, well, because that's what the British bureaucracies around the world required in order to run the British Empire and then the American Empire and all the rest of the empires. So my point is, now we need these other skills about seeing the bigger context. You said it really well, but that's a different kind of education, isn't it? If I'm in my mid-career, 40s and 50s, how do I go from being a button pusher that that got automated, and now I need to be a better at the people skills, better at context understanding? That seems to me to be a skill we're not teaching. Am I right?
No, you're. This is so spot on to what I was just discussing earlier today. For example, my daughters are in middle school. They're no longer being taught spelling. It's not even a part of the core curriculum. They're no longer being taught cursive. So when you ask them to sign something, they're just printing their name. So all of these things that we're not teaching are a result of this new technology that we have, because we don't need to teach them spelling. And then to carry on to your comment, Craig, because of the internet, because of the technology, we no longer need to physically teach our kids the tactical activities of how to program. That's something they can be taught in the workforce. What's not being taught and is now being labeled the 21st century skills of our students is the collaboration, the communication, the creativity, the leadership. All of these soft skills are listed by majority of the companies out there that they're looking for during the interview process. They can teach you how to program. They can teach you Python. They can teach you, how to program in the language they need. But what they can't teach you is those new skill sets that they're not going to learn in school anymore. So yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% advocate of what you're saying.
So are there other problems with digital transformations besides workforce reduction and skills improvements?
Other problems with digital?
Well, like it's overhyped. For instance, that's my viewpoint anyways.
So let me tell you a story, because I love stories. In 2015, Arden Partners, which is a think tank, published a study called the CPO Rising. And they established for the first time that the organization was no longer a strategic organization, it was an agile organization. And this was primarily to support the changes in our consumer demand and being able to quickly adjust to those needs. And we've been in that agile organizational state since 2015. But recently I wrote an article that outlined we're no longer in that agile organization. And we still have gaps. We still lack the confidence in our data, both procurement, supply chain. We still lack visibility in how we evaluate our risks. We still have inaccuracy in data, and it limits us to being able to make these actionable decisions in a time frame when those decisions are going to have the most impact. And regardless of what automation we've had, we're still performing all these tactical level activities that digital transformation was supposed to solve. That's where AI starts to fold in. And so the prediction now is that in 2021 and beyond, we're going to be shifting out of that agile organization and more into this informed or using these cognitive technologies.
So I like your point about AI, and I spend a fair amount of time on that with other partners, but let's talk about our current pandemic disruptions in supply chain for just a second. So where was the AI a year and a half ago, especially with car guys, which I used to be one, right? Where we started canceling all these orders because, oh my goodness, nobody will buy anything in the middle of a pandemic. And then we realized people were moving from the cities to the country and they needed a different vehicle. And so literally within 90 days, 60 days, nobody bought in March, and all of a sudden by May, people wanted to buy stuff. Well, so what did the procurement people do in the car business? Well, they stopped ordering chips and many other parts, right? And what did the chip vendors do? Well, because they're agile, they went off and they found other customers, like people selling computer screens. And we've talked about this in the show, but just so I don't lose you on the context. So where was the intelligence for the procurement for automotive to say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't cancel orders just yet, because we really don't know what's happening with the pandemic. And lo and behold, a different kind of demand got created. And because they misplayed it, to be kind to them, because it was misunderstood and misplayed, now they have this huge problem catching up, and we're finding out how weak parts of our supply chain are for integrated circuits, right? By the way, we'll fix it as a country, I'm sure, but it'll need another year till it's resolved, right? So my question is, AI or maybe I'm leading the witness here a little bit. AI needs data in order to be trained, right, through machine learning. And a pandemic doesn't happen that often, thank goodness. And this disruption was not well understood. Can AI help with these kind of problems, these resiliency problems where you maybe do a better job of modeling what might happen and then you can make better decisions?
Yep, absolutely. If I look at manufacturing and I look at global, and so this is a global manufacturing statistic, 50% of the manufacturing companies in Europe use AI today. This was a study done in 2020. Now, compare that to U.S. manufacturing. We've only got 28% of our manufacturers that are using AI. So when the pandemic hit, we weren't able to adapt as quickly as, say, the Europeans were. They were able to not only adapt, but they adapt quickly. They came out of it quickly. We're still struggling. Now, part of that problem, not only are we low and not implementing AI, but one of the challenges specifically in manufacturing is we can't create a scalable AI solution. So, for example, a lot of the facilities I've worked with, they have AI, they've prototyped it, they test it, they're using test data, but they don't have the infrastructure to pull it out and scale it and use real data. And that takes a data lake or some kind of data warehouse, or if you talk to Snowflake, it's now called the lake house. Which I think is funny. So I like saying that, the lake house.
Yeah, it's the house on the data lake. Well,
it's the house on the, But it takes the infrastructure to be able to house all that data that you just said. Then you actually need a team of data scientists and data engineers who can pull that data together, synthesize it, create the models, and then you need somebody that can understand what that data means and articulate the context and communicate it. So that's where we in the U.S. are a little further behind than, say, where the Europeans are. And that's, but if we had that infrastructure, if they had the place where they could store the data and they had that infrastructure and the team and the skill sets in place, absolutely, we would have been able to do those predictions. So
the good news for at least some big American companies that I'm well aware of, they are investing in those kinds of technologies, have in some cases for the last decade. They were motivated by something other than supply chain resilience, right? Like some of them sell operational on time or availability time. So they sell that the machine, like a jet engine, is running. They don't sell the jet engine, they sell the hour in the air. And so once you change the business relationship like that, you become motivated to do whatever it takes, including data lakes, to be able to study what's happening as your aircraft flies around. So, and it's the engine manufacturers, not the airframe manufacturers, that do that. So that's a kind of an interesting thing. So then the question is, all the rest of us, whether it's a car guy or a coffee maker person or somewhere in between, when do you take advantage of that same thing? Well, I think because it's becoming affordable, we've talked about Amazon Web Services on this podcast before about they can provide the small company startup with some pretty good AI data management stuff. And it's pretty affordable because it's, as you mentioned at the beginning, it's in the cloud. So it's becoming affordable. Well, let's talk a bit about agility. And you and I know what SAFe is, but a lot of our people listening, they've heard me mention it a couple of times. I'd like you to describe the Scaled Agile framework and how does that help what you're talking about? Yeah,
so first, I have a love-hate relationship with Agile. We can go into that more. But
you mean with Agile the word or Agile the
concept,
whatever they call it?
The methodology. Yeah, okay. I have a love-hate relationship with the Agile methodology. But to answer your question, Agile is typically this methodology that's used for product development so that you can move through those tasks in an iterative process and be able to reduce your cycle times, have more transparency, reduce risk. Then you've got the SAFe Agile, which is saying, well, we want to do it more than from a product perspective, we want to scale it to an entire organization. So safe agile, the way I use that terminology is it's not limiting to smaller teams. The safe agile methodology gives you that agile framework for the entire organization.
Does it work anywhere?
That goes back to my love hat. My love.
I thought it might. I have my war stories too, which we won't worry about.
Yeah.
So if I was an executive and you and I met for the first time and we're intrigued with our conversation and we're in an elevator and we're going up 32 floors in some city somewhere because there's a flood due to a rain. But that aside, why do I want to be sensitive to safe? I hear about it. I don't have enough time to study it. You've got, whatever it is, a minute and 30 seconds to convince me. Why do I need to care about safe?
Well, I'm going to assume that this is a technology provider, someone like Intuit, someone that's in Silicon Valley, because those are the individuals. If you're innovating a software that is being purchased by the consumer and you need to constantly enhance that and push out updates, absolutely this agile methodology, the safe agile methodology is perfect for that, because you're in this constant innovative cycle with no end. That's where agile methodology is the most best use of this methodology in that framework.
Okay, but there are companies, I would argue car companies did customer feedback and continuous improvement, though not at a weekly basis. It was more like every 3 to 4 years. Mm-hmm. But this notion of continuous feedback to improve a product, it's more than just software. When the software manifesto people did their thing back in whatever that was, the early 1990s, part of what they were pointing out is, and this is a reason for agile technologies, at least, they were pointing out, well, we don't really know the requirements. And that's true for a lot of software-based systems, that you got to kind of discover what the customer really meant when they wrote down those requirements. And a demonstration is the best way to do that. Well, then make the cycle fast. So I get your point about the Silicon Valley folks, but I do think, like a car guy, he's going to, I hear about this safe thing. Do I have to do it? I ran into a former executive at GM at a recent conference, finally face-to-face, first one in a year and a half. And the gentleman pointed out to me, he said, we've been doing agile in the car business for 50 years. We just didn't call it that, and we didn't run it at the same cycle rate, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think there are industries that in fact do it. Now, let's switch the horses. I just got out of school. I'm in my first job. I meet you on the way down the elevator. Hey, Melissa, you know about this safe stuff. I don't get it. Can you explain to me why I should care? I'm the youngster.
So that's an interesting question. Most people don't ask. They're just told they have to go get certified and learn it, because that's
why we're having this talk in an elevator, because I don't want them to know that I'm asking.
Because it's the organizational culture.
Yeah.
See, agile, that's what I don't get is if you have companies like these automotive firms like Tesla and Ford, and they use agile as part of the product design, even if it's not specifically software, but the product, that makes sense because they're constantly evolving they're constantly evolving that product, versus say, I'm going to do an implementation or a project that has a stop and start. Agile framework doesn't work throughout the entire process. It works great in the configuration and build phases, but then you stop and do more of that waterfall methodology when you get into the systems integration testing, because then there's an actual stopping point, and then typically the consultant walks away. What I get frustrated with is walking into a company who claims they're agile, says they're an agile organization, but yet nobody in the company actually knows what agile means, or they don't have the skill sets or the scrum master, or they don't adopt the philosophy that we're not going to have meetings, we're going to have 15-minute touch bases and specifically give me where your critical needs are. I think what this love-hate relationship I have is I go into a client site, we're agile, Melissa, we're going to do it. Great. We get on a phone call, again, 15 minutes. Tell me exactly where your risk dependencies are so we can help you. And next thing you know, it's 30-minute, 40-minute conversation of people telling me their life stories. So it's not just let's be agile and my organizational is agile. It also requires changing that mindset of each individual in the company. That's the biggest challenge. A company can really look forward to an agile organization, but somehow they have to understand how to train and transform the workplace to follow.
Yeah, and it's hard, and it's partly a skills thing, I think. And I am old enough to have seen this a few times, and when the scrumming came and became really popular, mm-hmm. I like the Scrum Master. I'm okay with it not being an engineering professional, because there's just certain rigor, right, that they bring to the process, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But I think people have to realize their role changes in that kind of a setting, right? If I'm the engineering expert, I'm expected to assess risk and provide options. I'm not expected to if you will, run the meeting. The Scrum Master runs the meeting. And so this changing boundary of what roles do, I think people not only need the introduction to what it is, but they also need a reminder, maybe even quarterly. This is your role in the process, and make sure you stay within the bounds of your role, and then it will go much faster, right? So the
best agile let me rephrase that one. The best agile learning I ever had was a 3-day course. We were put into teams. That was the team I was going to work with. We walked through a real life engineering using Legos, which I thought was awesome. And mm-hmm. periodically we'd come in and be given, additional risks, but we had to really go through it ourselves and really understand the roles and responsibilities. And we ended up building an intersection and through this agile methodology. And what was really interesting is at the end of this whole 3-day learning, we all looked at each other's, you think an intersection is an intersection, but it was interesting how all 4 of us built a very different intersection from the others. And I think that's something also that people don't tend to understand is just because you have the agile methodology, the framework, doesn't necessarily mean that your team's going to have the same output or the same expectations as the other team doing something else or similar.
Yeah. So you had one example on your LinkedIn site, and I just want to end with this point about visualizing, and it was a Lego example. And and people, you can go to Melissa's LinkedIn and find it. What I want to know is, how did you find that? Because it's an excellent point about visualization and mm-hmm. the power of a view rather than words, right? So, but how did you find it? Did you just stumble onto it, or some other way?
No, I actually follow. I follow a couple of people. I follow Dr. Marcel Volmer. He's from BCG, Boston Consulting Group. And then I also follow Susan Walsh. She's listed as the classification guru over in England. And both of them come at data from a visual perspective. So I thought the Lego thing was great because it really helps someone visualize what is data, what does it look like when it's organized, what does it look like when it's, pulled together. And if you contrast that with your audience, studies have shown that 65% of everyone you meet, so roughly 6 out of 10 people, are visual learners. Meaning they need to see the information visually or they're not going to understand anything you say. And these 2 individuals, either they're sharing information or in some cases, Susan just put a post out recently, Susan Walsh on LinkedIn, just put a post out recently where she just said, let me explain to you what I do. Here's a bunch of laundry that's, a picture of a laundry sitting on the floor. That's your dirty data. Here's now it's in the basket. Here's how we've washed it. Here's how we've organized it. And at the very end, you have clean, organized closet to represent your clean, organized data. Very clearly, anybody in 5 seconds can understand that visually without having to read a whole bunch of information. So everything we try to do is meet the majority of the population, which are visual learners.
So that's an excellent way to end. Make it more visual because it always helps. And it's been a joy to chat with you. Thom, I'll pass Melissa back to you. This has been great.
Awesome. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. If somebody wants to find you, how's the best way to contact you?
LinkedIn. Melissa Drew, LinkedIn.
Awesome. And again, thanks for being here. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. Please join us next week for more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. And remember, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out right now at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.